This is the second entry on a series of videos on Tekken 8. The original code was so long that I had to heavily edit it down. This is the result. Links to the previous video in the description. Having tested what I believe to be an important amount of different moves that will help us better analyze Tekken 8's lateral movement, we will proceed with a more focused set of scenarios to stress test the viability of said mechanic on the high priority character tools, beginning with Bryan. The following moves will be tested: Hit Smash, the third hit of 1-2-1, 3+4, forward 3, down 4, Hatchet Kick, Requiem, Sway 1 and Sway Smash. The following character-specific problematic situations will be tested: back 4 against an opponent at the wall and Sway 1 also against an opponent at the wall. Furthermore, I will also test Mach Kick's evasiveness against the following Devil Jin strikes: Demon Paw, down forward 1, Electric, Hell Sweep and Wraith Kick. For frame regulation, I use 1 for +1, down forward 1 on block for -5 and Hatchet Kick on hit for +5. Despite the fact that Bryan's Hit Smash was released in an appalling state, which rendered it practically unusable, as of a few patches ago from the creation of this video in October of 2024, the situation was entirely flipped, and now Bryan has access to a virtually homing Hit Smash that sees constant use at tournament level play and which disgustingly intercepts lateral movement with open disregard to diegetical logic of the animations at play and, of course, even worse, with blatant overpowered tracking on its second hit. And that second hit is the crucial, fundamental problem, as the first one behaves properly. The mechanical justification of such a psychological warfare of a situation is one that has reigned true in almost every single 3D fighting game ever created. When cancelling a step with any option, its vulnerability is lost. This is the in-game reason for why a player is counter-hit during lateral movement, because the moment any action is input during said movement, the defendant is no longer dodging, therefore no longer invulnerable to tracking properties, and, as such, a counter-hit is granted to the attacker if the choice of move still retains any level of tracking. This basic, foundational rule of 3D movement is required to be preserved up to a certain point, lest every player simply move around against attacks that cannot actually track at any point, because every single character's tools only seek the opponent's position for a frame or two. The crux of the balancing act resides in the design of the discrete attacks themselves and what the developer deems as reasonable duration of tracking properties. Quick editing note: I will be using IMOP's footage for the time being. A new patch has been added right in the middle of the editing process, 1.09, in which there were a few changes, and importantly, Dragunov's back 4-3 has had its tracking properties severely destroyed, and this is a very good example of how Tekken is the only 3D fighting game that regularly disregards the rule that we just spoke about. While the overwhelming majority of the game follows said rule, we have cases like this in which, as you can see, one particular attack has no tracking, even if the player is running towards Dragunov. Again, I had to do this quickly because I've already been editing this video down quite a lot, and during editing I get a new patch. Back to the video. I will, with no doubt in my mind, claim that every single proper 3D Tekken game grants too much time for attacks to follow the opponent in the said axis, especially when said strikes come from strings, even when the overall movement profile and quality of any given entry tends to be strong. Refer to Lee's Down 3 as a visual guide to a hypothetical game in which all or most moves only have tracking properties for a frame or two, or which have small hitboxes against the said axis. Such a game would see every player whiffing every move at all times. While many morons will claim that Tag2's movement system is too powerful, the reality is that we still have to deal with overpowered attacks and strings that enforce 2D guessing. I only need to reference two characters, Laz and Jinpachi. Let us now begin the analysis. When at +1, Bryan's Hit Smash is a half-circular mid that covers movement to the left, while losing to movement to the right. When at -5, Bryan can still cover sidestep left, but will lose to every other option. However, I must repeat that the second hit will counter-hit any move that cancels any step or walk. When at +5, his hit smash is a fully homing power mid that only manages to lose damage against a single sidestep right. Notice how, in the footage, the second hit whiffs, while a fully buffered sidewalk right will outright lose and be intercepted by both hits. The two hit smashes we have seen up to this point are an ugly stain on what is a great return to Tekken's core identity coming from Tekken 7. I must believe that at some point every single hit smash will be reconsidered by the developers. I cannot say much more. These types of moves are one of the truly repugnant features in Tekken 8. For this situation we will not test Devil Jin's performance. Having tested a 2-hit move with tracking properties of both elements, we will now observe the behavior of another aspect brought up in the previous section, excessive tracking during strings. Bryan is a strong candidate because he has access to one of the strongest jab strings in the game. 1-to-1 ends in a safe mid counter-hit launcher that can be done with 3 different timings. On both instant and slightly delayed timings, the attack is fully homing, and worse yet, it cannot be reliably option selected due to the 3 different timings and the existence of 1-to-4. More on that later. When fully delayed, 1-to-1 becomes half circular, covering movement to the right, a beautiful example of diegetical logic within animation and mechanical justification. For this string I did manual testing and set the CPU to perform the 3 timings of the first string as well as 1-to-4 at random intervals. This scenario is yet again low risk, low execution, medium to high reward. While we all understand that Bryan's entire character limitations regarding moves at 12, 13, 14, 15 and 16 frames come as the price to pay for his defining tool, the taunt, hence exerting a massive weight on his 10-frame jab strings to be arguably the best in the game, lest he be overwhelmed by every other character, I cannot help but believe that 1-to-1 should only be allowed 2 different timings that prevent him from covering option selected movement with either option when 1-to-4 already exists and does exactly that. Yet again, Devil Jin will be left out of this testing. I am grateful of the current state of Bryan's 3+4. Coming from Tekken 7's virtually homing, full screen, counter-hit launching missile, I do not believe it is exaggeration to claim that this very move exemplifies every correct decision taken by Tekken 8. There is very little to say. Every situation is completely diegetically logical while also being mechanically justified in giving Bryan a half-circular mid that covers movement to the left, hence reinforcing his weakness to movement to the right. Attack design that follows 3+4 as its building blocks results in engaging, dynamic and highly rewarding gameplay that scales with player knowledge and skill. A player seeking an answer against this safe mid counter-hit launching attack has a direct, transparent answer with very few asterisks. Regarding tracking when at -5, I do not worry about this situation because enforcing a 3+4 at -5 is, like said during Azucena's section, giving up one's own advantage. Bryan's forward 3 follows the same principles as his 3+4 and is, yet again, a beautifully designed attack that is noticeably easier to avoid through steps and walks than in Tekken 6 and 7. It might even be easier than in Tag 2. However, for this move, I did test at a further range because I know for a fact that it has stronger tracking than at range 1. I can say very little else. Bryan's best low and arguably his best move, down 4, remains absurd. Not only does it seem to have retained its Tekken 7 range, but its pushback on both block and hit are simply ridiculous. Back in 2019, when I made my Bryan guide in my Spanish-speaking channel, I said this is Bryan's best low, and not only do I maintain this opinion, but I now believe it might quite simply be his most powerful move. Notice how, at max range, down 4 becomes safe on block. I am baffled that such a ludicrous attack has survived these many patches unscathed. Moving on to tracking performance. While I do not have footage at hand to prove it, I do know that Bryan's down 4 has been avoided with lateral movement in tournament play. However, this is such an uncommon occurrence that I cannot waste my time searching for a clip. Bryan and Devil Jin perform identically. I can very decisively conclude that Bryan's down 4 in Tekken 8 is one exception of a move that has not only retained all its properties, but it has seen its tracking reinforced. Here is some practice mode from my Tekken 7 guide in which we can see that at 0 on block, down 4 can be dodged with a sidewalk right. I am speechless! I will not waste our time with the footage and will only show Bryan perform this at +1, as I know it behaves exactly like in Tekken 7. While this is a very saddening fact, the truth of the matter is that Bryan's Hatchet Kick has, over the years, been reduced to a simply inferior down 4 that, at higher levels, can be blocked on reaction. Even at my local tournaments, back in 2017, some players could react to it consistently in matches. Additionally, the increasing power creep around not only the entirety of the game, but regarding 12 and 13 frame punishment from crouching has turned Hatchet Kick's risk-reward situation on its head. While Tekken 6, Tag 2 and the early arcade versions of Tekken 7 allowed Bryan access to a low that, when blocked against the overwhelming majority of the cast, would only result in a minor 11 frame punishment, we have seen that, since the Fated Retribution update, Bryan risks taking more damage himself than what he does to his opponent if the low is blocked. Such a lopsided offer is only realistically usable when the low itself is fast enough to not be reactable. That, however, is not the case for Hatchet Kick. As such, while this low might as well be considered homing, it is simply inferior to down 4 and should not really be used by Bryan players to begin with. Requiem's strength in Tekken 8 is only balanced by the strictness of the command. Shockingly enough, even both knee and low high regularly make mistakes when attempting this particular move due to how demanding it has seemingly become. While I do not have anybody else with whom to test within real matches outside of Tekken 8, I do not recall Requiem ever resulting in forward 1+2, down forward 1, down 1+2 or rage-out this many times in previous games. While I edit down the duration of the clips, some of them are so short and produced in such a manner that I might not be able to remove all mistakes without severely damaging video intelligibility. Excuse then my lacking execution when performing this set of tests. Requiem's journey throughout Tekken since its sincerely useless introduction in Tekken 6 has been a rocky one. Only made safe on block as of the release version of Tekken 8, let us disregard betas and alphas as outside of the scope of the discussion, it was turned into a replacement for 3+4 in Tag 2, being a long-range, mid, counter-hit launcher that, unlike Tekken 6's 3+4, was punishable on block. Bryan is a remarkably strong character in Tekken 6, with the strongest Hatchet Kick version he has ever had. While the arcade version of Tekken 7 allowed for a launch on counter hit, not only were there many more characters capable of presenting decent punishment, while in Tekken 6 barely any character can make a dent on block, but Tekken 6's Hatchet Kick enjoyed the benefits of its utterly ridiculous rage system. Indeed, Tekken 6 Bryan had access to arguably the best low in the game, as well as arguably the best mid in the game, 3+4, both options showcasing absurd tracking properties. In Tekken 6, this missile is only -8 on block, and for the first time added a launch on counter hit. Tag 2 sought to rectify this nonsense by breaking 3+4 away into two different strikes, 3+4 by itself and Requiem as a rebalanced move. 3+4 therefore is no longer a counter hit launcher in Tag 2, instead being a long range power mid that controls space and will guarantee a combo at the wall while being -13 and only punishable in very specific situations or by certain characters with full screen 13 frame attacks. Requiem, also in Tag 2, is a counter hit launcher that wall splats on normal hit at -12 on block, much like Tekken 6. However, due to a very limited amount of pushback on block, Requiem was nearly unusable alongside its inconvenient command. Allow me to remember that, while we see a simple quarter-circle forward input, the strictness of Tekken 6, Tag 2 and Tekken 7 is beyond that of, for example, Street Fighter. Tekken 7's Season 2 enhanced Requiem's normal hit properties and completely removed its counter hit launch by integrating a wall bounce, a mechanic that is no longer available in Tekken 8. While I do remember Requiem being easier to space into safety in Tekken 7, I cannot recall what changes, if at all, were made to it in that entry. With Tekken 8 we now see not only the most powerful version of the move, but one of Bryan's problematic tools. However, this is not entirely caused by the native properties of Requiem, but rather because of the universal underlying mechanics intrinsic to the hit system. Without delving too much more, I can state that Requiem is a very well designed strike with clear, undeniable intrinsic strengths that are beautifully balanced by an even stricter command than in previous entries, which, sadly, is stained by the overwhelming properties that reside in the hit system. As such, while Requiem could have been a cornerstone Bryan utility by virtue of safety, damage, advantage on hit and wall splat on normal hit, it has degenerated into a missile that Bryan players hopelessly spam ad nauseum in hopes to reap the benefits of its health regeneration on hit engager. Before moving on to analyzing its tracking properties, I must preface this section with the following. Due to the already mentioned strictness of the command, testing equivalent situations has proven nearly impossible, as every instance of the attack is performed with minor timing differences that greatly affect tracking properties. Such a situation did not happen to other moves that require quarter circle commands like Sway 1 or Hatchet Kick, blatantly showcasing that, at some point in the input reading chain, Requiem imposes some form of further requirement. While we can decisively state that Requiem is yet another reminder of Bryan's weakness to lateral movement to the right, set difficulties to perform this attack at instant timing will inevitably delay its execution and fundamentally change its tracking performance. Let us get the silliness out of the way. At -5, Requiem will only lose to sidewalk right. However, because of the absurdity of the very proposal of enforcing Requiem when at -5 while at range 1, I cannot bother analyzing this instance as anything other than a curiosity. For +1, Requiem is a half circular through and through. In keeping with other moves, Bryan will punish movement to the left while losing to all movements to the right. Beautifully, at +5, Bryan's Requiem is even easier to avoid, with only a buffered sidewalk left being incapable of beating it. This is yet another obvious case that does not require the testing of delayed sidewalk. The concept is simple to see and beautiful to observe. The stronger the advantage, the easier Requiem is to avoid through lateral movement. Were it not for the massive reward on hit because of the hit system, I would call this one of Tekken 8's greatest designs. If the hit system receives serious nerfs, I will reconsider this attack. When testing against Devil Jin, we find what I believe to be the first decisive difference between the performance of both characters. While every other situation behaves identically when at +5, Requiem will consistently track Devil Jin's sidestep left and sidewalk left. Sidewalk left will only sometimes be able to succeed in avoiding the missile. Thankfully, Requiem remains an all but blind strike against movement to the right for Devil Jin as well. Ever since Bryan players were given access to the game through preview versions in 2023, we warned the developers of the overwhelming strength of this new move. An almost half screen, +5 on block, counter hit launcher that does around 4 points of chip damage seemed like a recipe for disaster. And while it is, indeed, an utterly ridiculous move that Bryan should not even have access to, the reality is that, given the level of power creep corrupting Tekken as a whole, and Tekken 8 in particular, Sway 1 has managed to stay under the radar in a competitive landscape deformed by the likes of Dragunov's CD4, Azucena's while running 3, hit engaging Demon Pulse on multiple characters, Devil Jin's Psycho Crosser, Lily's safe on block, voila, Xiaoyu disappearing from the game, and Jun's safe on block launchers. My brain and heart ask me to complain about Sway 1 more than I do, but when there are still strikes far more potent than this particular one, I am left dumbfounded that Sway 1 cannot, under any circumstance, be considered a priority problem for the developers. As such, let us move on to tracking performance. At +1, we can see that Bryan will cover steps to the left, however, every other option will lose consistently. This is true for both Bryan and Devil Jin. At -5, we see yet another larger difference between both characters, this time in favor of Devil Jin. While in many other instances I would not consider a -5 scenario to allow enforcing another attack, this particular situation, down forward 1 into sway 1, is perfectly possible in real matches because of the threat of additional machine gun punches, therefore at times opening the door to stealing a turn into a sway 1, and in this instance Devil Jin's sidewalk right will be able to beat Bryan. However, while consistent, this is only possible at instant timing. Delightfully, at +5, every single lateral movement option beats sway 1. We can see how sway 1 follows in the trend of being a weak move in terms of tracking against movement to the right while consistently covering movement to the left. Sway smash remains a monstrous attack from Bryan. Due to the speed of the attack, I will avoid testing -5 situations. Due to its low speed, input strictness, requirement for confirmation on hit, profound disadvantage on block, and the nature of the second attack not being a true Mach Kick, I find this scenario to not be all that offensive. All in all, sway smash can only lose against a fully committed, buffered sidewalk right and will catch every other option under most circumstances. I will not test the full string on instant timing due to being a mid to high series with inherent risk in and of itself, instead only with a delay. When delayed, the second attack of the sequence will lose to movement to the right, catching movement to the left. Devil Jin's performance in this test is far stronger than Bryan, putting him in a completely different category. At +1, Devil Jin can actually use sidestep right to avoid sway smash, unlike Bryan. While it is not entirely consistent, it is consistent enough to be wholly transformative. However, the most crucial advantage for Devil Jin is seen in a +5 scenario. While only Bryan's sidewalk right will come out victorious, Devil Jin's sidestep left, sidewalk left, and sidewalk right will be able to avoid the mid. This is, with no doubt in my mind, the most clear and real difference we have seen in the entire tests. Devil Jin performs identically to Bryan when the string is delayed. Bryan's back 4 has certainly been nerfed in terms of usage at the wall, as it is much more difficult to space and time correctly enough for it to be entirely safe than in previous entries. However, this tool is still remarkable because while the former statement is true, the differences between a fully safe back 4 at the wall and an unsafe one are minute enough that not even top level players can consistently make the correct decision in real matches. As such, back 4 still sees regular use at tournament level. While certain characters with far-reaching jabs will be able to punish Bryan with high to complete consistency, we must understand that the majority of the cast is still expected to react to the distance on the fly. Of note, as can be seen in the footage, the behavior of the pushback on block is quite bizarre, sometimes maintaining Bryan right next to the opponent, while other times sending him very clearly beyond a jab punishment. Let us then look at the performance of these moves' tracking properties in a problematic stress test scenario, the corner. We can all celebrate with joy as back 4, while virtually half circular against Bryan's strong side, is clearly very deficient in terms of tracking to Bryan's weak side. Notice how, to get the opponent to actually be hit by back 4, I must find the most obtuse and disadvantageous angle possible. When the defendant readjusts, back 4's tracking property is again not finding them. However, I must point out footage from one of my matches in which Devil Jin, after a hatchet kick, managed to avoid back 4 with a full sidewalk left. While there are many of such rare situations in my footage, there is so much of it that I cannot possibly find every situation. We will now continue with a test similar to the previous one, but with Sway 1. Here we see another example of Devil Jin's superior lateral movement, not only opening up better options, but turning one of the results up on its head. Despite the fact that sidestep left at +1 is not viable for either Bryan or Devil Jin, it turns out that the latter, under the same situations, but at the wall, can actually step to the left to avoid Bryan's Sway 1. While this option is still dependent on the angle of the attack, it is yet another reminder of the complexity of Tekken and the fool's errand that fully studying it truly is. Bryan can only achieve the same successful step to the left when at off-axis angles and with lower consistency. Aside from this curious interaction between movement and wall, Sway 1's performance is expected, if saddening when considering that intercepting movement to the right is not particularly difficult to achieve. To finish up this set of tests, I will attempt to avoid a series of attacks after a blocked one with Bryan's Mach Kick in practice mode. Before I speak of the results, I must preface this by clearly stating that the evasive properties of Bryan's Mach Kick have been increased noticeably when compared to almost every other Tekken game, not simply Tekken 7 and Tekken 5. The only other Tekken entry in which I find dodging attacks easier with Mach Kick is Tekken 4. The list of attacks, all against Devil Jin, is as follows: down forward 1, Hell Sweep, Wraith Kick, Demon Paw and Electric. The only move that manages to decisively beat Mach Kick was Wraith Kick. Every other attack either lost outright or was not capable of intercepting Bryan with any level of consistency. I do not think I need to point this out, but Wraith Kick tracks sidestep left. This is why Mach Kick cannot actually avoid it. Still, I decided to try it out for these tests. I cannot understate how powerful Mach Kick is in Tekken 8. Due to how much of a cancerous, non-evasive attack that it is in Tekken 7, most Bryan players have been brain-rotten into believing that, since it has lost its counter-hit launch, it is no longer useful. I am here to shout at every Bryan player to remove the Tekken 7 mind-eating bug out of your skulls and make use of what is Bryan's best Mach Kick in 24 years. I cannot add anything above what the footage already firmly showcases. I am a Bryan player that has enjoyed the most interesting fighting game character in the most complex fighting game series since Tekken 5 back in 2004 when I switched from Kazuya, and I can barely remember any other entry that gave me access to such a powerful, satisfying and beautiful tool like Mach Kick is in this entry. Bryan, despite being given access to a couple of tools that intrude too far into the territory of 2D fighting, is what I believe to be the most successful character design in Tekken 8. As a matter of fact, this version of Bryan is, alongside Tekken 5's, the one that I love the most, both mechanically and aesthetically, surpassing his Tekken 6 incarnation in terms of character model. While I do enjoy Bryan's character from a gameplay perspective a tad more intact too, the fact that the game suffered from such poor character models always made me quite sad. I also must add that the change in voice is one I am grateful for. While Tekken 6's outstanding character model helped mask the poor choice of voice, Tag 2's and Tekken 7's utterly disastrous character models shone a spotlight on how poor those voice samples actually were. I find it so bizarre that people complained about Bryan's change in voice when Tekken 6 already had given him a higher pitched voice than the previous entry.
Some super cop you are. Don't worry, I won't kill you here. I'm gonna take my time and let you savor your death. You lost to me once. Now try and squirm your way out of here. Let the hunt begin.
Come on! You win.
The only aspect I will keep complaining about regarding Bryan is the obvious case of rejuvenation that the character has gone through. While I would much rather keep Bryan a man in his late 30s to early 40s, I also understand that, narratively, Bryan has achieved a certain level of immortality and possibly a way to regenerate his human body parts, which would explain him looking like he does in his early 30s or late 20s. For crying out loud, in locals I have met countless players below the age of 28 that looked older than Bryan looks in Tekken 8. To end, I also want to point out that I find the decision to make Bryan visually smaller, even if slightly, is one I agree with. The concept of Bryan being a tower made no sense considering his canonical height, even if height in Tekken is a vacuous measurement. Excuse the distraction into topics outside of the focus of this video. I simply am very happy with how Bryan turned out to be in Tekken 8, coming from being extremely terrified seeing how Tekken 7 turned out. Everything up to this point has given us enough of a picture to avoid the necessity of testing preliminary attacks in a vacuum. As such, we will jump directly into a problematic set of options. Claudio will perform a standing 1 for a +1 situation into a randomly selected attack from the following, while running 2, forward forward 2, forward forward 4, forward 4, and forward 1+2, 1+2. I, playing as Bryan, will use every basic movement option, both sidestep and sidewalk, to the left and right, a minimum of 5 times each or until the full set of attacks has been tested, for, again, a minimum of 25 attempts in total. As the results were very successful and consistent, I do not believe it is required that we test Devil Jin. When it comes to steps, Bryan was capable of simply defeating the whole scenario, or at worst, be forced into a block by forward 2 at specific timings, or while running 2 also at specific timings, against a step to the right. A full-blown success. The scenario becomes less consistent, however, when we use sidewalks. While sidewalk left outright beats the whole pressure approach and requires no analysis from my part, I found that sidewalk right and delayed sidewalk right were unnecessarily risky and would repeatedly lose against Claudio's while running 2. I cannot pretend to be happy with such a bizarrely illogical result. However, considering the fact that every other movement option is so powerful that Claudio cannot degenerate his attack plan into abusing his Superman punch, I cannot be angry in any way with the holistic picture. Of note, no execution was actually required for this evasion, despite the fact that I expected while running 2 to have stronger tracking in synthetic observation. A great success for this test. Much like the previous character, we will set the CPU to perform a series of attacks in a couple of scenarios for me to avoid. Devil Jin will begin with a standing 1, which he will randomly follow up with an electric, hell sweep, demon paw, and his forward 4. Let us quickly get along past the very easy answer. Bryan's sidewalk left are completely consistent in this situation. Little more to add than that. Before making any analysis on sidestep left in this scenario, I must warn everyone attempting to reproduce this test themselves. While every situation we have seen up until now ranged in terms of difficulty, every single instance was doable for the vast majority of the player base in real matches, even if rarely. The following test, however, requires a very specific step cancel timing to actually dodge every single attack rather than block either the electric or the demon paw. Additionally, not only do I play Mishima as myself, but I have several thousands of matches across several games against Mishima players. Please, those of you watching who are new to Tekken or of a lower skill level, do not expect to be able to do what you are about to see in real matches before a great deal of practicing against capable Mishima players has scarred the timings into your head and hands. Without warning out of the way, let us look at Bryan's performance. Bryan, when the player's execution is not faltering, is entirely capable of covering all of these options in the scenario tested, while at worst being forced into a block. While there were attempts that were caught by the electric, we must understand that this synthetic, randomly selected pressure series pushes the limits of what Bryan can actually do by real humans in real matches, and I was purposely attempting to find successful dodges against every option of a simple step block, while in real matches, depending on my opponent's level of execution, the electric option might not be a real threat from a single jab. Here is some additional footage of just how long it took me to successfully dodge an electric from a +1 situation 10 times in a row with Bryan. Within the same +1 scenario, Devil Jin's performance is about on par with Bryan or better. However, the timing requires faster reactions to the opponent's jab because to cover every option, Devil Jin must buffer this step, otherwise this step will be intercepted or forced into a block. I will leave the time it took me to find the proper timing with Devil Jin, which is, evidently, different to that of Bryan's, for some reference, as it helps illustrate adaptation between different characters. The next and final situation we will test for Devil Jin is the last hit of his laser cannon string, which was specially selected to teach anybody watching how to deal with it now that it has received serious nerfs. While I had been a clear defender of rebalancing Devil Jin's laser cannon, I cannot say anything other than the Tekken team went completely overboard and turned the greatest string in Tekken history into a completely useless husk of a move. While previous games in the series allowed for challenging timings on the third hit and 2 ever-present options, the version we have access to in Tekken 8 strips Devil Jin of any actual offense from the third hit, but let us look at how the CPU behaves when at the wall. As seen, this string cannot be used with reckless abandon anymore. Another set of very successful tests. Before going into the tests, this is another unscripted reminder that a patch was implemented during the production of this video, and in particular during the editing of this very part of the video series. I will not retest this section of the video because the situation has only improved. If it had been worsened, if tracking had been improved, I would have retested. However, seeing how clearly Dragunov's second hit of back 4-3 has lost most of its tracking properties, I do not feel there is any need to test. Back to the video. Not simply Tekken 8's most powerful character, but the one that has somehow avoided serious rebalancing since release. Discussions about balance are out of the scope of this video, but the release Day 1 version of Dragunov was, no doubt in my mind, the most powerful character proper 3D Tekken has ever seen. While game-killing disasters like Steve in Tekken 5, the Ogres in Tekken Tag, Lars in both Tekken 6 and Tag 2, and Leroy in Tekken 6 were utterly cancerous to Tekken's health, the reality of the matter is that Every single one of those characters was actually required to hit the target. Dragunov, in day 1 of Tekken 8, could kill his opponent on block. I have never seen such a clearly unfinished character in Tekken in my life. I installed the original version of Tekken 8 and here is some footage of only one of Dragunov's tools. Crouch dash 4 and only on block. There are no words for the state of Tekken 8's balance at launch. Moving on to the tests. At +1, Dragunov will randomly attack with running 2, crouch dash 4, back 4 3, back 4 2, hatchet kick and back 1+2. I originally meant to add down 2 to this set of attacks. However, after deliberating on it for a couple of days, I decided against it, seeing as how down 2 has lost almost all of its relevance in the current arsenal of the character. Dragunov's mid attacks are so devastatingly powerful that he no longer even requires lows to present real threats. Let us get the clear, straightforward answer out of the way. A deep sidewalk right will beat most options. However, back 4-3 will, more often than not, beat this movement option. Every other option will lose, with back 4-2 also sometimes catching Bryan. Both characters perform similarly, but Devil Jin, again, clearly requires less effort to get a successful sidewalk. We will now test a fast, fully buffered mid-range sidewalk right into an option selected crouch for a low block with both Bryan and Devil Jin. This option, if input correctly, will not only shift the defending character's hurtbox to the point that Dragunov's hatchet kick might simply whiff, but it will also cover those situations in which execution or timing are not proper by presenting a block that will allow a punishment on said hatchet kick. This is a complicated defensive option. However, its strengths are undeniable and, as we can see, only back 4-2 will be able to hit Bryan. Importantly enough, however, when performing the same option select, Devil Jin will outright beat every option, as back 4-2 won't connect against him. When pushing the limits of what can be done, we see that a single, fast and deep sidestep right into a low block will cover almost every option, much like how the previous OS did. However, you will also very clearly observe that, when doing so, Dragunov's back 1+2 will consistently intercept both characters. Now, while back 1+2 is a powerful, advantageous on block mid, it has been supplanted in most cases by the very present crouch dash 4. When we remove back 1+2 from the pool of attacks, we can see that both Bryan and Devil Jin can reliably present a defensive option with a single fast and deep sidestep right into a low block. Additionally, when removing both hatchet kick and back 1+2, we can tackle this scenario with remarkable consistency. Dragunov is the strongest character in Tekken 8 and has, since the very first day, been one of the two strongest characters. After the massive nerfs that hit June, I can no longer doubt about Dragunov's position. However, the crux of the balancing issue does not reside within the core Dragunov toolset, but rather with the new additions brought by Tekken 8 that have severely increased power creep to the point that Dragunov single-handedly makes Tekken 8 a difficult game to play online. Were Dragunov not to have either Hatchet Kick nor CD4, the discussion would be completely different. Dragunov's core strengths in Tekken 8 can be avoided through movement. However, at the end of the day, the lopsided nature of risk-reward when actually presenting proper defense against the simple fact that a single crouch dash 4 will steal a round against perfect or nearly perfect defense leaves us at a crossroads. Dragunov is a couple of changes away from perfect design. However, I know those changes will not happen because it is clear that the Tekken team will not remove the new moves Dragunov was given nor nerf them into becoming irrelevant. For our tests, this scenario is also a success. The blame for the problems we have found does not fall onto the movement system, but the overarching balancing which drains the game. Jin remains one of the most powerful characters in Tekken 8 while also seeing his executional requirement noticeably lessened. In exchange for the best electric in the game, which leaves him at +5 right next to his opponent as opposed to traditional Mishimas, the tracking on said electric is by far the weakest in the family. Barely any timing is required to avoid this particular option in the scenario we will test. As usual, after a blocked standing 1, Jin will perform a series of attacks at random. These being the following: Electric, Hell Sweep, Forward 4, Forward 3 and Demon Paw. Jin's Hell Sweep enjoys far stronger tracking than that of Kazuya or Devil Jin, but it pays for that property by being slower than the rest, slow enough that at high level play this is a reactable low and only scarcely usable. There is very little to say about Jin, yet another great design, if too powerful for such a plummet in executional requirements. Down 2 is one of the most absurd moves I have seen in the game. However, this is a plainly online only move and far too slow to be consistently used at high level. But of course, unlike something like Bryan's Hatchet Kick, Jin's down 2 will beat highs at a certain point in the animation. My apologies, I do not remember which ones exactly, and I believe it was changed recently in a patch. Of course, this is not relevant to the current discussion. This test with Jin was also a great success. A moment of truth, to be sure. Sadly, the Tag 2 stress test does not work. However, fret not, as I have a couple of other tests that are remarkably difficult to impossible to perform in Tag 2 itself. I should note that Lily can actually sidewalk left in this situation, but the executional requirement is too high. I should also note, however, that my stress test is also exactly that, a stress test that requires remarkably precise execution. Let us look at the stress test scenarios in Tekken 8. One on hit for +8, into a working sidestep left, and, of course, a standing 1 into a sidestep right on block. Sidestep to the right in this situation is also doable in Tag 2, however, it is so difficult and so inconsistent that I could not bring myself to attempt to record it. On the other hand, I can guarantee that anyone watching this video can perform this step to the right. On to the real tests. Kazuya is a bizarre character that mixes two extremes of the spectrum. At first I thought I had done something wrong, because with the full set of attacks I was completely incapable of covering both the electric and either of the hell sweeps at the same time. However, when testing the discrete attacks themselves, I kept very clearly observing what I had felt in all those thousands of matches against both Devil Jin and Kazuya, that Kazuya's Hell Sweep and Electric were clearly easier to step than Devil Jin's. But time and time again, as you can see in the footage, I could not cover this scenario like I did earlier with Devil Jin. After further inspection, I realized what was happening. I had found the key difference between the tracking profiles of Kazuya and Devil Jin. While Devil Jin's bespoke Mishima tools most certainly enjoy stronger tracking in and of themselves, the windows for said tracking properties are close enough that, with good execution and timing, as shown previously, a player can avoid the mix-up with a single step rather than a full walk. When it comes to Kazuya's core Mishima tools, it is obvious that single steps can easily avoid every option without any difficulty. At wager any player of any skill level can do what I am showcasing on screen right now. However, while the tracking itself is weaker, the differences in tracking window between Kazuya's Electric and both of his Hell Sweeps is large enough that, for Bryan, it is not possible to consistently cover a Kazuya mix-up from a player with execution and mental presence tight enough to present both options at similar timings. As such, against Kazuya's full-blown mix-up, Bryan does still need to utilize a full walk to be able to cover every option. Conversely, Bryan can make use of a similar OS to the one discussed against Dragunov, or simply step in seeking to avoid the Hell Sweep into a block against the Electric and take the disadvantage. You may have grown accustomed to the saying Devil Jin's lateral movement performs better, but we must state this again, and noticeably so yet again. Kazuya's standalone attacks are even far more of a breeze to avoid by themselves, but even more importantly, Devil Jin does have a proper timing to cover both options with a single sidestep left. This for sure is not an easy ask, but is still an improvement over Bryan's movement. These are positive results, if not mind-blowing. At this point of the video, I do not need to waste any more time. Heihachi's Hell Sweep is a unique low with massive tracking, requiring a full walk for Bryan to be able to actually dodge. This was an unexpected, if pitiful, situation. What I am happy to communicate is that Heihachi's most deranged tool in Tekken 7, his Demon Uppercut, is now easily avoidable. Thank Athena that this utter nonsense was placed into the corner that it deserved. To end, let us see how Heihachi's Electric behaves. On a +1 situation, it is by far the easiest to avoid in the entire game within the traditional Mishimas. It also loses against sidestep right when at close range, and on that, +1 advantage. A standing one on hit into an Electric cannot be stepped, unlike against Kazuya. When performing this Electric after forward 4, we can see that Bryan can easily and consistently avoid the situation. I am also happy to report that both delayed timings for down forward 1, 2 are easily avoidable with a single step to the right. Performing this string with instant timing will intercept any attempt to move. I do not find this to be necessary when down forward 1, 1 already beats lateral movement by itself. However, the fact that both of the very scary delayed options can consistently be stepped is nothing short of lovely. Yet another strong character design that respects lateral movement. Tracking on Heihachi's Hell Sweep is worrying, but justified by the much weaker reward on hit than every other Hell Sweep from the Mishimas. I cannot contain my excitement over these results. I am certain that we are dealing with a game that is a worthy successor to Tekken's movement and which far surpasses anything both Tekken 7 and Tekken 6 could achieve, being a virtual equivalent to Tag 2 in regards to lateral movement. We still cannot perform some of the more esoteric scenarios that can be done in Tag 2, but we have new situations that not even Tag 2 could compare one to one. Balancing aside, Tekken 8 is a massive return to form that in less than a year has healed almost all of the damage Tekken 7 did to what makes Tekken Tekken. The complaints, crying and biblical idiocy I have been witness to throughout the months does nothing more than to fuel the engine of my hateful heart towards those that would call Tekken 7 a good fighting game, let alone a good Tekken game. Because indeed, the fire of these witch hunts finds sparks only in the adjacent matters to the fundamental fabric of the game's core. Yes, Bandai Namco is a horrible company. Yes, Harada blatantly lied to everyone for years about paid content. Yes, Morai is a clown. Yes, Tekken 8 added cancerous battle passes. Yes, we are being milked for our money despite the fact that many of us paid for the most expensive edition. Yes, Tekken 8 is a remarkably unbalanced game, nearly the most unbalanced fighting game we have had in half a decade. But no, Tekken 8 does not suffer from gameplay issues. No, Tekken 8 does not harm strong defensive play. No, hit is not worse than turning the game into a glorified 2D asset flip like Tekken 7. And finally, no, Tekken 8's competitive run is not invalid because of character popularity. On the contrary, we are seeing a shockingly healthy amount of different characters being represented in world-class competition, something we barely ever saw in the early versions of the previous games. Tekken 8's true cordial conundrum is power creep. Balance be damned when the product must release with a massive roster of characters, each with hundreds of different attacks. Power creep that gave Dragunov a Hatchet Kick and a Crouch Dash 4 for reasons that only the devil himself could conjure. Power creep that bestowed Bryan with a half screen plus 5 on block missile of such power that the developers made a custom combo limitation from a Requiem hit engager just so that the character could not strike his opponent with a 60 damage lightning bolt. Power creep that continues to grant Demon Pause to characters with absolutely no right for them. Power creep that outright invalidates the claim that Kazuya does not have good fast meets by giving him the greatest string mix-up in the entire game, even better than Dragunov's back 4 guessing game. However, power creep is manageable. Whether it will is a different discussion. A completely broken movement system, on the other hand, is not, and Fated Retribution's patched movement was a clear indication of it. Enjoy, my friends. Tekken is back. It has been too long, but Tekken is back. In my original video we would have gone right into analysis of high level play. However, as the current video's duration has grown out of control, I must divide said analysis into a different upload as stated at the beginning. See you soon.